Why do Japanese farmers grow vegetables 3 times faster than you? Hello, friends. If you are new here, this is a place for people who love plants, but maybe feel a little tired, a little confused, or even frustrated by them sometimes. Let me ask you something honestly. Do you enjoy growing plants but feel like it takes too much effort for too little reward? Do you grow indoors on a windowsill, on a small balcony, or in a backyard garden, and still wonder why your plants grow slowly, struggle, or attract pests no matter how hard you try? Are you someone who wants healthy soil, strong plants, and long-term results, not quick fixes that only last one season? If that sounds like you are exactly who this video is for. After many years working with gardens, small farms, and living soil, I've learned something most beginners and even experienced gardeners are never told. The problem is rarely your effort. The problem is the system. Today, I want to show you why some growers, especially in Japan, can harvest vegetables 3 times faster on the same amount of space with less work. And no, it's not about expensive tools or secret fertilizers. It's about how they design relationships between plants, soil, and time. By the end of this video, you'll start seeing your garden differently. Not as something to manage and fight, but as something that can support itself. If you enjoy thoughtful, practical gardening that feels calm, natural, and deeply rewarding, make sure to stay with us and grow here. Before we talk about what Japanese growers do right, we need to slow down and look honestly at what most of us have been taught to do wrong. In many modern gardens, especially in small home spaces, we treat plants like objects. One tomato here, one row of lettuce there, bare soil in between. Everything neatly separated, controlled, and measured. On the surface, it looks organized, but under the surface, something is deeply off. This way of gardening comes from a factory mindset. We believe that if we add the right inputs, water, fertilizer, pest spray, we should get predictable outputs. Bigger leaves, faster growth, more harvest. But a garden is not a machine. It doesn't process instructions. It responds to relationships. When you plant a single crop in isolation, those plants compete with each other for the exact same nutrients at the exact same soil depth at the exact same time. The soil between them sits exposed, stressed, and empty. And nature hates emptiness. That's why weeds rush in. That's why pests find your plants so easily. You end up working harder, not because you're doing too little, but because the system is working against you. Over the years, I've seen gardeners blame themselves. They think they're bad at growing. They think they lack talent or discipline. But the truth is simpler and kinder than that. What if your plants were never meant to live alone? What if they weren't competitors, but partners? That question changes everything. And once you ask it, the way Japanese growers design their gardens suddenly makes a lot more sense. Once you let go of the idea that plants must live alone, a very different picture begins to appear. This is where Japanese growers quietly step ahead by bringing plants closer together, not farther apart. In nature, no healthy ecosystem grows in isolation. Walk through a forest and you'll see dozens of species sharing the same small patch of ground. Roots overlap, leaves touch, scents mix in the air, and somehow, instead of chaos, everything grows with strength and balance. That's not an accident. That's cooperation. Japanese farmers design their gardens the same way. They don't grow as individual plants. They grow communities. When different plants share space, they also share timing, energy, and protection. One plant shades the soil. Another loosens it. Another sends signals through its roots. Growth accelerates, not because of force, but because of connection. I've watched this happen in my own gardens year after year. When plants grow close, they mature faster, suffer less stress, and recover more easily. The soil stays cooler. Moisture lasts longer. And something subtle but powerful happens below the surface. Life begins to organize itself. Many home gardeners worry that planting close will cause competition, but in reality, smart proximity reduces it. Different plants use different depths of soil, different nutrients, and different rhythms. Instead of fighting for the same space, they divide the work naturally. This is the first real shift from gardening as control to gardening as design. When plants are allowed to socialize, the garden stops feeling fragile. It starts feeling alive. And once that foundation is in place, cooperation becomes visible in ways that are impossible to ignore. When people ask me for one example that perfectly explains cooperative gardening, I always come back to the same system. Not because it's trendy, but because it works every single time when done with intention. It's known as the Three Sisters. At first glance, it looks simple. Corn, beans, and squash growing together in one shared space. But once you understand what's happening, you realize this is not just planting. This is choreography. The corn rises straight and strong, reaching for the light. It doesn't just grow for itself. It becomes structure. The beans follow, climbing naturally, wrapping gently around the corn instead of demanding a wooden trellis or metal frame. As they grow, they quietly pull nitrogen from the air and feed it back into the soil, nourishing everything around them. Then the squash spreads outward, low and wide, covering the ground like a living blanket. Its large leaves shade the soil, locking in moisture, suppressing weeds, and protecting the delicate life below from heat and erosion. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is forced. Each plant expresses its nature fully, and in doing so supports the others. I've seen gardeners struggle for years building supports, buying fertilizers, fighting weeds, only to be amazed when this system outperforms all of it with less effort. That's the lesson here. You're not adding more work. You're removing unnecessary work by designing smarter relationships. Once you see how powerful true cooperation can be above ground, your curiosity naturally turns downward. Because the real acceleration, the kind that triples growth, doesn't happen where we can see it. It happens beneath our feet. Once you understand cooperation above the soil, it becomes impossible to ignore what's happening below it. This is where most gardeners lose time without realizing it. Because the real engine of growth is invisible. Healthy soil is not dirt. It's a living network. When you grow different plants together, their roots reach into different layers of the ground. Shallow roots explore the surface. Medium roots spread and stabilize. Deep roots mine minerals far below. Each layer feeds a different community of microbes and fungi, and those communities talk to each other constantly. Over time, this creates what I like to call an underground superhighway. Fungal threads connect plant to plant, moving nutrients, water, and signals across the bed. A bean plant fixing nitrogen doesn't keep it all to itself. Through these networks, that nutrition becomes available to nearby roots. Minerals pulled up from deep soil don't stay locked away. They're traded and shared. I've worked with soils that looked exhausted on the surface, but came alive once diversity was introduced. Plants began growing faster, not because I added more fertilizer, but because the soil finally had a reason to organize itself. Life responds to complexity. This is why bagged fertilizer can never compete with living soil. It feeds plants briefly, then disappears. Living soil feeds continuously, adapting with each season, each planting, each harvest. And once the soil is alive and connected, something remarkable happens. The garden starts defending itself quietly, efficiently, without constant human intervention. If there is one thing that makes people give up on gardening, it's pests. The endless checking of leaves, the spraying, the feeling that no matter what you do, something is always eating your plants before you can. But here's what years in the garden have taught me. Most pest problems are not invasion problems. They are design problems. In a monoculture garden, a single crop sends out a strong, clear scent. To insects, that's an open invitation. A straight row of tomatoes doesn't look neat to them. It smells like a buffet. Pests don't have to search. They simply follow the signal. Japanese-style gardens disrupt that signal completely. By surrounding crops with aromatic plants like basil, onions, and marigolds, the scent landscape becomes complex and confusing. pests struggle to locate their target and often move on without ever settling. But the system goes deeper than that. When you maintain continuous plant cover and diversity, you create a permanent home for beneficial insects. Ladybugs, lacewings, and other predators don't pass through. They stay. They become active agents working on your behalf day and night. I've watched gardens shift from constant damage to quiet balance without a single spray. Not because pests disappeared, but because the system stopped favoring them. When you design defense instead of reacting to attack, the garden becomes calmer. And that calm creates space for the final advantage Japanese growers use so well, one that multiplies yield without needing more land. Once pests are no longer dominating your attention, you start noticing something else: space. Or more accurately, how much of it has been going unused. Most home gardens are designed flat. Everything competes on the same horizontal plane. And even though nature has always grown upward and downward at the same time, Japanese growers think differently. They see the garden as a three-dimensional system. Vertical stacking is the art of letting each plant occupy its own layer of light and air. Tall crops rise first, creating structure. Climbers follow, using that structure instead of demanding extra materials. Medium-height plants fill the open spaces, while low growers and ground covers protect the soil below. I've seen a single small bed produce what 5 separate beds struggled to achieve simply because every layer was doing something useful. No plant was wasting energy. No space was idle. This approach is especially powerful for people growing in small areas, containers, balconies, or compact backyards. You don't need more land. You need better relationships between height, timing, and function. When plants are stacked instead of spread apart, they stop competing for light and start sharing it. Growth becomes faster, denser, and more resilient. And once you've learned how to stack space, the final lesson completes the cycle: how to feed the system without ever draining it. After all these years working with gardens and soil, I can tell you this with confidence. Most fertility problems are created by the way we remove things, not by what we fail to add. Many gardeners finish a harvest and immediately clean everything away. Spent plants are pulled out, carried off to compost piles, or thrown away entirely. Then weeks later, nutrients are purchased and brought back in bags. It feels productive, but it quietly breaks the natural cycle. Japanese growers approach this differently. When a plant finishes its role, they don't remove its value from the system. They cut it, and they drop it right where it grew. This simple act changes everything. Leaves, stems, and roots begin to decompose on the soil surface, feeding microbes and fungi exactly where they are needed. The nutrients that plant gathered over its lifetime don't leave the garden. They stay, slowly returning to the soil and becoming available for the next generation of crops. I've watched soil transform over seasons using this method. Each cycle becomes richer than the last. The ground stays covered, moisture stays locked in, and life never has to restart from zero. This is not about being messy. It's about being efficient in the deepest sense. You harvest food while simultaneously building fertility. No export, no deficit, just continuity. And when all these pieces come together, cooperation, living soil, natural defense, vertical space, and closed-loop fertility, you finally understand why some gardens seem to grow effortlessly. They were never managed. They were designed. So now you know why some gardens grow faster, stronger, and with far less effort. It isn't because the growers are working harder. It's because they stopped fighting nature and started listening to it. When you step back and look at everything we've explored, a clear pattern emerges. Plants thrive when they are connected. Soil becomes powerful when it is alive. Pests fade into the background when balance replaces control. Space multiplies when we think vertically, not horizontally. And fertility becomes abundant when nothing valuable ever leaves the system. This approach isn't just for large farms in Japan. It works just as well on a balcony, in a raised bed, or in a single container by a sunny window. You don't need to change everything at once. Start small. Combine plants instead of separating them. Leave the soil covered. Let one season feed the next. Over time, you'll notice something subtle but deeply satisfying. The garden begins to feel calmer. Growth feels more natural, and you'll spend less time fixing problems and more time enjoying the process. I'd love to hear from you. Have you tried companion planting, chop and drop, or growing in layers? What worked and what surprised you? Share your experience in the comments below so we can all learn together. Keep growing gently and let the earth delight you. If this story changed the way you look at the life growing in your garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the wisdom that has been overlooked for too long. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next treasure of knowledge will be revealed very soon.